So today we've got an interesting session here. We're going to start out with Bob Clemens, who I've had the pleasure of knowing for a while. He's a great guy. And Vince, we've only talked briefly. Vince has got some good stories. And hopefully John Schott will be here momentarily. All three B-17 guys, a pilot, a navigator, and a gunner. And then also shortly we should have Hiram Mann from Tuskegee Airmen. And he's quite a storyteller, I can tell you. I had a great time talking with him on Friday. But let's begin. Bob lives in the area. Actually, Vince, where do you live?
I live in Stillwater.
Stillwater, okay. Let's pull that mic a little closer. That was actually kind of a check, test check. So what I want to do here is really kind of delve into the B-17 experience for those of us who can't afford to fly up in the Yankee Lady, which we'd all like to do. So these guys are going to tell us what it's like, the B-17 experience, and they have a lot to tell you. So Bob, why don't you start out and just tell us a little bit about, I don't want to have too long a lead-in because I think these people are really excited knowing about where you flew, what you experienced, and I'll kind of lead you through it as we go.
Okay. Well, I went to high school at White Bear Lake. I graduated in May of 1942 and I entered the Army Air Force in November of 1942. I was commissioned as second lieutenant and had my wings as an aerial navigator in February of 44 at age 19. I'd like to tell you my impression of when I got to the first time I saw a B-17. I joined the other 9 men in my crew at Sioux City, Iowa in what was called Overseas Training Unit. And when I entered that machine, a farm boy, a young kid, 19 years old, looking at that airplane, it was an absolute marvel. Now, to you people today, it might look like prehistoric, but 70 years ago, it was a pretty modern machine. And when I got in that airplane and saw some of the instruments, the drift meter, the airspeed meter, it was just absolutely overwhelming. And then I hadn't been to gunnery school, so the pilot told the engineer, the top turret gunner, to give me a short course in the 50 caliber machine gun. You know, I'd hunted with a 12 gauge shotgun, but when I looked at that 50 caliber machine gun, it was overwhelming. So the whole thing just kind of overwhelmed me because it was so big. And so it was so IT modern for that day. And if some of you get out there on the flight line and either take a flight in the B-17 or look it over, go through it, or walk around it, you can imagine what it looked like to a 19-year-old kid. And that airplane became a really important part of my life because that's where I was going to spend the next 5-6 months. I went overseas in May of 1944 and...
Okay, so let me pull Vince in here now, if I could, for a minute.
Sure.
So Vince, when did you first see a B-17?
Well, I saw that in gunnery school out in Las Vegas, Nevada. Actually, when the bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor, I was out northeast of Ortonville, Minnesota, hunting jackrabbits. It never dawned on me that I would ever be caught up in a war.
Or be a gunner.
I was 16 years old, but it wasn't long before I had to quit high school because my dad lost his health in his meat market and his slaughtering company. I was scalding hogs and butchering cows and carrying quarters of beef that weighed more. I could hardly wait to get in the war.
Right.
So I did. And I eventually ended up in Las Vegas, Nevada as a gunner. And I first stepped into the B-17 there, and it was quite an experience. We learned formation flying, and we learned how to fire our guns, air to ground, ground to air, and we shot at TOC targets. Liz Strophus, if you've heard that name, very famous. She would dive on us in pursuit curve with AT-6s, and I'd fire cameras at it, and then we'd develop the cameras to see how accurate we were. I told her one day I could have used bullets because I never would have hit her.
I've never heard of that. That's fascinating. So let me ask you, did your expertise with shooting jackrabbits help you shooting Me-109s?
Yeah, well, let me tell you about that. Early in the war, the Germans stopped attacking the tail. Maybe it's because they knew I was the best tail gunner in the war. Or maybe the swastikas that I had painted over. That might have helped. But the truth was, they would come out of the sun in pursuit curve at about 350 miles an hour. They'd come in doubles, maybe 4 at a time. And it happened fast. And they'd come in on the B-17 pursuit curve, and the B-17 is traveling about 150 miles an hour. They have to get in position to fire. They lost that 150 miles of speed. Now they're only doing 200. We could shoot them at 600 yards, and they had to get within 300 yards. So they changed their tactics, and they began to attack the front of the bomber. They go after the pilot's compartment. They come in and make a quick pass, and they were gone.
So you'd shoot them as they were heading off? Could you even see them? You'd see them as they headed off?
Yeah, no, I never had, they didn't come in on me, but I would call out where they were so that the ball gunner could see what they were. And when I was there, the Luftwaffe was pretty flat, was the big problem that we had.
This is Hiram Mann, Tuskegee Airmen, P-51s. So we were just talking about B-17s, and we're going to go back and forth, Hiram. Let me check your mic.
About 2 minutes.
That's fine. That's fine. Take a breath, have some water. Bob?
Yes, sir.
Were you the math guy? Is that how you became a navigator, or just a bad shot?
No, actually math was my favorite subject in high school, and so when I got in the military, I decided if they would let me, I wanted to be a navigator. Now they gave you a test that had some hand coordination and some mental questions, and you were scored 1 to 9. I was fortunate enough to score 9 on all 3, bombardier, navigator, and pilot. So they did ask me, which one do you want to do? And I said navigator, and so that's how I became a navigator.
So did you ever do dead reckoning?
Yeah, that's what you did most of. Dead reckoning was 80% of the way we navigated.
Can you explain, maybe not on training, but when you did dead reckoning, when everything was riding on it?
Well, you look down at the ground and you coordinated that with the maps. I decided when I got to Europe that I better look those maps over and become very familiar with them. So I knew the continent of Europe in those days, in 1944, better than I know the state of Minnesota. And so I constantly studied those maps. They were maps made by the British in the late 20s and early 30s. The important thing is they had the right altitudes of the mountains, because we flew over the Alps on most of our missions going north out of Italy. And so those maps were very, very helpful. They became a part of me. We carried them in a briefcase that was about this thick. We had maps of every section of Europe. And I did use them for other methods too. I used them to sat on them when the flak was coming up, because they'd stop a lot of flak. I usually took the chair out of the B-17 by the desk that they worked on. I kneeled there or sat on the maps and just used the current map that was in the area that we were flying.
Hiram, how are you doing?
I just about talking away.
No, catch your breath. We've got lots of time. Lots of time.
Another 2 minutes.
That's fine, that's fine. So, Vince, as a tail gunner, did you have other duties?
Well, I'd like to explain some of the times that we were over the target. Flak was exploding. Flak probably took down more aircraft in World War II than fighters. And the navigator on my crew, on occasions, would say oxygen check. we would go around and make sure everybody was okay. You couldn't see the guy down in the ball. If it was moving, he was okay. As far as the tail gunner was concerned, all you could see was the back of his shoes, looking through past the tail and in from the waist. So we would go around, starting at the tail, and all report in. One day, the radio guy didn't answer. So we went around again. He didn't answer, and one of the waist gunners didn't answer. So Clancy, the pilot, called me, and he said, "Parker, what's happening back there?" Well, I could look past the tail wheel, through the waist, into the radio room, and Faust was down, out cold. And Patchy, the waist gunner, was trying to get oxygen into him. You don't live very long at 50 below zero with beyond 3-4 minutes. So I reported that to Clancy, and he says, "We're going down." And we dove over Vienna from 28 to 12,000 feet, past the danger line. There's a red line on the B-17 at 275 miles an hour on the speed indicator. We went past that. Things can happen. You could lose an aileron to control. We pulled out. We saved him. It was really never the same after that. But one more interesting thing. On the way down, he said, "Prepare to bail out." Well, I was always ready. I had my own escape hatch back there. And after the war, he said, "Don't bail out," though. He was talking to me, I'm sure, "unless you hear the emergency bell." Well, after the war, I saw the circuitry didn't reach the emergency bell in the tail. The guys would have waved out and said goodbye.
Now, you flew over Italy as well.
Yeah.
You came out of Italy and then flew north.
Yes.
So tell us where your missions were.
We bombed northern Italy, we bombed Czechoslovakia, up around Germany quite a bit, just south of Berlin. We bombed a lot of oil targets because they were making synthetic oil and so forth. We went over Brooks one day. You've never heard of Brooks. It was Christmas Day. We went over Brooks, and I would wiggle past my ammunition boxes and to my escape hatch, and the shells would explode. So I put on my parachute and my flak suit, so I had all this stuff, and every movement was a measured movement. You could hardly move. And I would listen for bomb bay doors open. The target was 5 to 20 minutes before they dropped the bombs. And I listened, bomb bay doors open. Bombs away, and the ship would lift. Well, they didn't drop the bombs. We went around again, 2 times over the target. Still no bombs away. They went over 3 times, a suicide. Finally dropped the bombs, and I got to think, it was Christmas Day, and here was my twin sister back in Ortonville under the Christmas tree, and here's mother, a son over in Italy, my brother was in critical condition in France, and end of story.
So speaking of oil targets, Bob flew over Ploesti. And for those of you who don't know, the Romanians had the Ploesti oil fields, which the Germans took, and it was very critical to the German effort. And the synthetic crude that they were developing in Germany was not really doing really well. So a lot of guys risked their lives, and a lot of guys lost their lives flying over Ploesti. And Bob flew over Ploesti 5 times?
5 times.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll draw Hiram in this.
Well, you know that Ploesti oil fields were huge. Any of you that have gone down Highway 52 on the way to Rochester see the oil refinery on the west side of Highway 52 there. That's a small oil refinery compared to the refineries in Ploesti. Now, the oil refineries there were built by Shell Oil and Standard Oil, and they had trained the Romanians very well. My impression was that the Romanians weren't very happy about producing oil for the Germans, but they had to do it because the Germans had their guns at their back. And they did a marvelous job. We'd bomb Ploesti, the oil fields. We'd have fire and smoke 30,000 feet in the air. We go back 3 days later, and they're operating at full tilt. These Romanians really know how to put out the fires and get those oil refineries back in position to produce oil. We finally did do a lot of damage to them. But then at the end of August 1944, the Russians took over Ploesti, and so we didn't have to bomb that target anymore. And all the guys that had been shot down over Ploesti and were still alive came back to Italy.
And I might add here, I've actually been to Ploesti, and in passing through that area on business, I saw a cemetery and I stopped to pay my respects. And the Romanians have done a wonderful job of taking care of these ceremonies, these cemeteries. It looked just like Fort Snelling. The grass was kept, it was trimmed. They paid great respect to the fallen heroes. And one of the things I noticed, and I was talking to Bob about, and he confirmed, I don't think I saw, this is different than a national cemetery with lots of graves and lots of different people. These were just people that had been shot down over Ploesti. The average age probably was 18. There were some 17-year-olds. There were very few that were 20. It's a very young crowd, and I think you can confirm with B-17 crews that was common.
The common age was probably, average age was 22 to 23. My pilot was 28, and we thought he was an old man.
And how old were you?
I was 20 when we were doing that bombing. And I was the second youngest man on the crew. The left waist gunner was 2 months younger than me.
Hiram, we'd like to draw you into this.
I'm hot to trot.
Great, great. This is a great storyteller here. So I want you to tell us about how you managed to get in the air, because there was some resistance at the time, correct me if I'm wrong, about letting a man like you in the air. So tell us briefly your story. I loved your story the other night.
Well, my story begins a little.
Speak his mic up.
My story begins before America got into World War II. I married in 1940, and I was working, no children on the way or anything like that, just young, dumb, and in love. We eloped, and my marriage life was as average, but I decided that America would get its nose into somebody else's, into Europe's business. And I told my bride I wanted to fly to fight for my country. This is my country too, whether you realize it or not. But I regard America as a very great place to be. So my wife threatened to shoot my toe off if I volunteered, but she did not. And I wrote a letter to the War Department. I don't know exactly what I said in the letter. No computers, no printers, no carbon paper. Letter longhand written in ink. The first letter of rejection that I received said straight out, there are no facilities to train Negroes to fly in any branch of the American military service. That ticked me off. I threw the letter away and went back to hopping bells. And then I heard that America was going to permit Negroes to get into a flying training program. I had not done my homework before I wrote my first letter, and I still had not done my homework when I heard Negroes were going to be permitted to get into a flying training program. So I applied the second time. That letter of rejection was a form letter sent to anyone who did not qualify. That letter spelled out for anyone, black or white, to get into a flying training program. They had reduced the requirement from you must be a college graduate to you must have completed a minimum of 2 years of college and you must be single. I see, here I was with 3 strikes against me. I was married, I had had 1 year of college, and I was black. So I went back to working. And as the war, America got into the war, and it intensified, they dropped those 2 controllable restrictions and said anyone who could pass the rugged mental and physical examinations could get into a flying training program. So I applied the 3rd time. And I tell all you parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and neighbors to tell the youngsters that when someone tells you you can't do something and you know you can do it, go out and prove them wrong. Show to them that you can do it if you're given a chance. I preach that, I said that especially for minority youth, but that holds true for any race, regardless of what you are. When someone puts a block in your path and you know you can do whatever it is you're attempting to do, go out and prove them wrong. prove that you can do it. Now, my getting into the flying training program, I'm older, I think, than most of my contemporaries here. I'm 92 years old. But it took me quite some time to get into this flying training program. I was in the 27th class of Negroes to graduate. Had I gotten in when I first applied, I would have been in pilot training before World War II started, before America got into World War II. But these delays that I met put me in the 27th class. And I say that with mixed emotions. Had I gotten in with among the first classes, I may have been one of those Negroes shot down, and I may not be here talking with you this afternoon. But as it was, I got in. I was very lucky. I flew 48 combat missions, and I returned unscathed, unharmed by enemy aircraft or enemy fire. What you see before you now is from arthritis. I'm arthritic head to toe, and I do the best I can. I love to talk and tell about my experiences when we get to the questions and answers. I'm not thin-skinned, so any question you ask, I will give you an answer the best I can. I will not make up an answer and tell you. I've been on daises with fellow Tuskegee Airmen and young men. They're more thirsty than the high school girls. The fellows, how many did you kill? I say none. And they look at me quizzically, and I say I returned unscathed. I came home. My wife says that she wore her knees out, praying that my safe return, and I was brought back safely. So that.
Okay, so we'll work through some more. I know you've got some great stories I want to hear. John, tell us, you were a pilot also, like Hiram.
Yeah.
Pull that mic closer and.
Yeah, okay.
The first time you flew in combat, you flew a B-17, just like we have out here.
Yep.
You're responsible for the crew, and you've got a mission. Where were you flying your first mission?
Oh, it was Prairie, France. This was later in the, can you hear me all right?
Speak into the mic. Pull the mic up.
A little closer, okay. Okay, how about now? Is it okay? Royan, France, and they said we're going in.
So that was, you're flying out of England over France.
Yeah, and you're going in at 15,000. Okay. 15,000. Got to worry. I was a co-pilot, and so. We assembled over the field, headed out for our
You'd never seen flak before, right?
Didn't see it on that film, did it? But what had happened is that they had sharp batteries along the coast, French coast, and they were getting a lot of the fuel of big earthen shells into the shipping going up the coast. United Kingdom. So we started up on routine, everything was routine, and all of a sudden I said it was smoke. I thought they were rockets. I said, oh my God, they got rockets. And I said, this is it, you know. And finally, after we were on turn, after the bomb turned to go back, you could still see the smoke from these. Actually, they were marker ones that would mark. You had to have a score of a certain amount, each bomb group a certain amount to within a 100 circle area. So that was just a test, and it scared the hell out of me. Right? But if
you're not prepared for
that was the first test.
Right. So Bob?
Yes, sir.
Did your plane ever get hit? And, you've got to use your navigational skills to get them home while the fuel's leaking?
Yeah. Well, we got hit, as far as I remember, on every mission we got ground fire. and probably 2/3 of them we had German fighters. Probably the most scary mission we were on was we went to Budapest, Hungary, toward the end of June 1944. We were going to bomb what we called marshalling yards there, where they put trains together, freight trains together to deliver supplies. We went into the target at 23,000 feet, but there was cloud cover below us and one above us. And above us, the Germans were using some Ju-88s to drop bombs on us. The colonel decided that we would circle the target and go in under the cloud level that was below us. We circled the target for 20 minutes, getting back over the target at 13,000 feet. Well, now 20 minutes doesn't sound like very long, but boy, when they're shooting flak at you, it seems like a lifetime. They really shot the dickens out of us there. When we got over the target, we made the bomb run, and just after we dropped our bombs, number 3 engine was hit, and we had a feather it. That meant we turned the propeller like that so it didn't create any drag. We then were at about 11,000 feet, and this is when the German fighters liked you when you were a straggler. And so we couldn't keep up with the group, so FW-190 attacked us, followed by 3 ME-109s, and they got number 1 engine. And the way they got number 1 engine, one of their 20mm shells hit the propeller and it took a chunk out of the propeller. Well, of course, it didn't run smooth, so I had to feather that, so we're on 2 engines. By the way, a 20mm shell is about this long and about this big around, blows a hole in the airplane about this big around. We shot back at them with 50 caliber machine guns. Now, the one advantage we had on them, our 50 calibers were effective at about 600 yards. Their 20mm were only effective at 300 yards. So now we're down to about 10,000 feet. There are some mountains in the Alps that we have to go over to get back to southern Italy that are 11,700 feet. So the pilot asked me if I would plot a course around them. And that's what I did. We flew around them. We threw out a lot of the stuff in the air, in the bomber, including the Norden bomb sight. Now, the Germans probably had 5,000 of those from ships that were shot down. But anyway, we got back. When we got back, we had about 30 holes this big around, about 300 from flak about this big around. Now, the amazing thing about it, you know, we got all the glory, those of us that flew, but the guys on the ground did a whale of a job. That ship was back ready to fly in 2 weeks. 2 new engines, 300 flak holes patched, 30 20mm shell holes patched. I talked about 35, 40 years ago, I talked to the crew chief on that plane. He said he worked 56 hours without going to bed. So you got to remember that the guys on the ground and the guys on the Navy ships did a great job. We probably, as flyers, got more glory than we're really due us. But people they like flyers. They like people with wings on their uniforms. But those people on the ground did a whale of a job, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate them. Now, I did bribe them some because I didn't drink, so we got 6 cans of beer a week. I always took those up and got them cold and gave them to the ground crew. The candy bars I got, I couldn't stand to eat those. I gave those to the little Italian kids because they were so hungry. But the people on the ground just did a fabulous job, and I appreciate what they did for us.
Thanks, Bob. And that's something we all need to remember. Whether it was fixing up damaged tanks, submarines, ships, planes, Yankee ingenuity and engineering, just basic aptitude really helped win the war.
I also want to thank Hiram because the Tuskegee Airmen, the Red Tails, escorted us several times, and they did a whale of a job. The movie, The Red Tails, the bomb group they show in that movie is the 463rd out of Italy, the bomb group that I was in.
Really? Interesting. So Hiram, you were in the 332nd Fighter Group. What squadron?
I was in both when I first went over, I was assigned to the 302nd Fighter Squadron. And later, our history is all messed up. But the way it goes, we were in the 12th and the 15th, later, the 15th Air Force. We flew out of North Africa, then the group moved to Sicily, then when they finally moved up to Italy, near Foggia Ramatelli, that's on the Adriatic side of Italy, about midway. And we flew, I was assigned to the 302nd Fighter Squadron. Now the table of organizations, well, when my group first went over, the 99th Pursuit Squadron was the first group of black military pilots. None of them, when they were finally squadron strength, and they were black public, and the few black presses began the big hue and cry, give our boys a chance to fight. Give our boys a chance to fight. None of the white base commanders in Europe wanted the black fighter squadron assigned to them. They were attached to different squadrons. Those of you who have seen the movies, my preference is the Tuskegee Airmen, which was copyrighted in 1995 by Home Box Office. Red Tails is a nice entertainment movie, but it starts in North Africa. It doesn't merely show the difficult time we had as Negroes getting into the flying training program. But anyway, when we were finally accepted, the 99th Pursuit Squadron, then the base commanders began to complain that the black fighter pilots were not getting kills comparable to the white fighter squadrons. And our commanding officer, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., he came back to the States and he defended us by saying, how can we accomplish fighter kills if we don't have fighter contact? So they decided to take a chance and give the black fighter pilots escort assignments. We were referred to as pea shooters. Well, all fighter planes were referred to as pea shooters. And lovingly, among the bomber groups, we teased the bomber groups and called them boxcar drivers. All respect to my bomber group companions here, but they lumbered along 200, 250 miles an hour, and we could skitter in and among doing 350 miles as cruise speed.
Is that a P-51?
Well, we flew.
You flew both?
Yes. My combat experience was primarily with the P-51 Mustang. I did fly some P-47 Thunderbolt at the time, but my preference, of course, is the Cadillac of the Sky, the P-51 Mustang, the D model.
So how did that P-51 compare to those German planes?
I had no contact with, that is actual face-to-face or dogfights with the Germans. I did mostly dive bombing, escort, and strafing. The escort was our main duty. Then we supported the 8th Air Force. We flew supply dropping escort. The escort duty was for the fighters to keep the German fighter planes away from either the supply dropping or the fighter bomber groups. The enemy wanted to knock the bomber planes or supply planes out of the sky. They did not care what happened to the pea shooters. We were one man, one plane. And we had, I forget what our total complement of bullets were, but when we fired our guns, we did not have long to fire. And we didn't have any, well, if we were doing dive bombing or skip bombing, something like that, we did carry bombs, but we could only carry maximum 2 bombs. And then we released them both at the same time, so we had to skitter back to our home group. But I was left off by saying that when Davis tried to protect the 332nd Fighter Group, they sent him back with the 100th Fighter Squadron, 301st Fighter Squadron, and 302nd Fighter Squadron. He brought 3 fighter squadrons to the 15th Air Force. Now the 99th Pursuit Squadron name was changed from Pursuit to 99th Fighter Squadron, and it joined the all-black fighter group, 332nd Fighter Group. The 15th Air Force Table of Organizations says each fighter group would have only each fighter wing would have only 3 fighter groups. The 332nd Fighter Group had 4 fighter squadrons. So the 302nd, being the last activated, was the first to be deactivated, and all personnel remaining in the 302nd were distributed among the 99th, 100th, and 301st Fighter Squadrons. So I was reassigned to the 100th Fighter Squadron.
So
for the most of my combat with the 100th.
So tell me, before I move on to John, tell me about Benjamin Davis's plane. What did he call his plane?
Well, at first when he went over, his plane was named after his girlfriend Agatha. And as we had proved our mettle, we proved that we could do the job that we were intended to do. We could provide close protection. And Davis, I'm sorry for the interruption, but Davis,
That's the sound of freedom.
Davis told us the eyes of the world and America are on you, meaning us, the fighter pilots. Depending upon how we performed in combat would be how the Negro race was thought of back in the States and in the world. So that he warned us if we went off chasing after glory to aggrandize ourselves, we would be court-martialed. And he meant what he said. So that we stuck close to doing what we had been assigned to do. That's one of the reasons our record was as good as it was.
But tell me, he changed the name of his plane from Agatha and at some risk to his girlfriend, I guess. Tell me the name of his plane.
Well, actually, Agatha was his wife, and he changed it from Agatha to by request. We became the most requested fighter group to fly combat for the bomber escort or bomber, whatever duty they had to do. We became the most requested. We flew 5 days before we got a day off. I can't vouch for it, but I'm told that our white counterpart fighter groups would fly 1 or 2 days, have 1 or 2 days stand down, fly 1 or 2 missions, 1 or 2 days stand down. We had to fly continuously 4, 5, 6 flying days before we got a day off. We were always undermanned. We got our replacement pilots from one source, and they were always there. And there's an interesting little something.
Let me come back to that
Oh,
for
come
just a
back.
minute, okay?
Okay.
John, tell me, when you're flying, after your first round, your first mission over Rouen, when you got further, you eventually flew over Germany, right?
Oh, sure.
So tell me about your most harrowing mission. Did you fly over Berlin? What was your worst mission?
Worst mission was actually Pilsen, Czechoslovakia. It was a long mission that had been Eisenhower had requested that once we were airborne, that they would broadcast through the American radio that we would warn the workers in the factories, all the factories that the Germans had producing war materials in and around Pilsen. And we had about an 800 plane group. And we knew that they had very strong fighter forces down there, including ME-262s.
Those are the jets?
Jets, yes.
German jets, later in the war.
So they were a twin-engine jet, fairly new, but they've been developed and very effective.
And when you flew in there, you'd probably been briefed that they had jets, and you knew that flying in.
Scuttlebutt.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, but nothing official.
But that had to be weighing on your mind.
Yes, like it, yeah. That balloon. But, so we went on a mission and we're about to turn on the IP, start a bomb run, and all of a sudden the two, one in the lower squadron, one on the wing,
Speak in the mic.
they just disappeared. And of course the waste gunners could see them. And they said they got two of them. And this ME-262 peels off to the right, and my top turret gunner says, can't track them.
Right, you've never seen anything like it, right?
Well, the turret is motor driven, and it wasn't fast enough to attack the speed of the jet aircraft.
Right.
So, yeah, we lost two good friends on that one, and we did have a lot of battle damage coming back from Pilsen. In fact, I got an email, this is about 4 years ago. The people of Pilsen, even though we bombed their city, they have, when they were more or less relieved of the German command by Patton, they have a day set aside. At that day, they celebrate the freedom that America gave them.
Right, I'm sure they do. So John, let me ask you, in hitting Pilsen, how long a mission was that for you?
It was about a little over 11 hours.
That's about as long a mission as most people flew, isn't it?
Yeah, it was deep into the earth.
And how long are you on oxygen when you fly an 11-hour mission?
Well, you do step climb up to bombing altitude, and you go on oxygen at about 11,000 feet, and then you own that oxygen mask until either it's shot off your face or somebody trips over. But no, it's you get a lot of time with an oxygen mask on.
And I assume you're tense the whole time. So you've got to be exhausted the last couple hours coming in.
You're busy. Flying, we took pride in flying in very close formation. In fact, we were awarded as one of the best formation flying, the 379th Bomb Group of Cuba. And they were commanded by Lou Lyle. And Lou said, listen, you guys, if you don't want to get shot down, you better tuck your wings in there, because that gives you the shotgun effect, so that you get more bullets going at whoever's attacking you. So, yes, it was very effective.
So you have to pay attention then.
The fighters pay attention too. If you see a group of bombers, and all of a sudden they come close in and close their ranks, somebody knows in the fighter group that they're ready for go ahead and attack if you're taking your chances.
Right. So Vince, tell me, how are we doing on time, Don?
Say, listen, you gotta ask these guys, the B-24 was a better bomb.
I don't know that I want to answer. That's the B-17 guys.
That was the box that the B-17 gave in.
Yeah. So Vince, tell us about the view. You must have done some bombing runs where you had an excellent view of the flames shooting up towards your plane.
Well, actually, flak took down more bombers in World War II than fighters. It was torturous. It was always there. You couldn't avoid it. One day a shell exploded under the ball turret of my plane. The ball turret gunner called up and he said, has anybody got a windshield wiper up there? It was hydraulic fluid from the brakes. We were dropping back and we had other problems. So the pilot called me and he says, Parker, have you got your parachute back there? I said, come on, Clancy. He said, we may have to throw out your parachute. I said, I'm going with it. He said, your choice. We probably don't have tires. I know we don't have brakes. So when we come into land, we need you to rig a parachute. And there's a little canopy. Hi there. That's the canopy. That you could rig the parachute and you held it there. We came into the landing pattern. He made a nice landing. The runway was streaming behind me. All the way in, he talked to me. Don't use that parachute unless I tell you. I could have messed him up in the sky. You've seen these parachutes used as brakes in the movie. So finally he yelled, don't need it. When I threw it down, we used up the entire runway. We ground looped and stopped. The plane was a mess. He came back to me and he grabbed me and he says, Parker, you did a good job. I said, Clancy, I didn't do anything. He said, that's what I mean. I didn't have to do anything.
And he felt good knowing you were ready.
Oh yeah, it's a good, everybody loved the pilot, the commander, left seat.
Let me bring this out for a couple of questions. Editor? Yes, sir.
When you were on escort duty, and the German fighters came in, if they knew you weren't going after them, why were they afraid of you?
We had the reputation of, it was then said, our record read, we never lost a bomber to enemy aircraft. Since then, that record has been contested, but I say I'm going to stick with that which is published until they officially change our record. The change came about when we were about to be issued, when it became known that the 332nd Fighter Group was going to get the Congressional Gold Medal. Two former white bomber crew members that had been prisoners of war objected. They said our record is not as pure as it's written, that the planes they were on had been shot down by German aircraft and not ground fire. My question is, how do they know those aircraft were not ground fire? Nevertheless, the man who was then president of the Tuskegee Airmen, Inc. decided that we should soft pedal that never losing a bomber when our record was reviewed. Even though we may have lost a couple of bombers, see, to lose a bomber, you lose 10 men. With each bomber you lose. You have the pilot, co-pilot, engineer, navigator, nose gunner, tail gunner, top turret, bottom turret, starter gunner, and these 10 men on. To lose a fighter plane, you use one little plane, one little pilot. So they really wanted to shoot the bombers out of the sky, let the pea shooters go.
Did you ever pursue the German fighters?
No, Colonel Davis told us, eyes of America are on you. Do not pursue seeking personal aggrandizement. Stick with the bombers as you are assigned.
Do we have another question? Yes.
May not have shot down that many planes, but how many lives saved in the process?
He's saying you may not have shot down that many planes, but how many lives did you save in the process? And of course, the record was exemplary in any to the point.
Well, when they finally permitted us to do escort duty, Colonel Davis warned us, stick with the bombers, that's your assignment, so that the Germans didn't try to penetrate our protection as much as they may have attempted to penetrate one of the others. And this is a lot of hope, Huey, about the color of your bomber, of your fighter plane. You can't look at any plane any distance away and tell what color it's painted. So that's a lot of stuff. I heard this talk about ours is painted red so that the Germans would know that we were up there.
Just back in the sky. Do we have a question here? Bob had a relationship apparently with Axis Sally that I've never heard about. So I guess we're going to hear about it if Bob's willing to share it.
Well, I came down to the flight line one morning about the middle of August 1944. I was going to fly with the lead crew. We were going to lead the 5th wing in Italy. That was 6 B-17 groups. And they said that the co-pilot would not be flying, that the old man, the colonel, the squad group commander, would be flying in the right seat. Now the group commander, his name was Frank Kurtz. He had been an Olympic diver in 1936. You remember the Olympics in 1936 were held in Berlin, and Hitler got his nose out of joint. You know, Hitler didn't like black people, he didn't like gypsies, he didn't like homosexuals. There were so many people he didn't like. Well, Jesse Owens was the fastest man in the world at that time. He won 4 gold medals. He was black, and so Hitler wanted to hold back the medals. Well, he had to bow to world pressure and give those medals to him. But I understand that he left the presentation of the medals. Well, anyway, during the 36 Olympics, Frank Kurtz was an Olympic diver, and he met Axis Sally. Well, on this particular mission in August of 1944, we always listened to German radio because they played great music. Glenn Miller, Tommy Dorsey, Jimmy Dorsey, Gene Krupa, all of those good bands. And while we're listening, she came on, and their propaganda was kind of stupid, I thought. You know, she'd always say, you guys ought to quit and go home. You know you're going to lose. You know, your girlfriends and your wives are running around with other men and crap like that. And, you know, it didn't make much of an impression, but we liked the music. Well, she said, Frankie, we know where you're going today. We know you're going to Budapest, and we're waiting for you. We're going to get you. And you know that little pink-faced navigator from Minnesota, we're going to get him too. So that was my relationship with Axis Sally. I want to say one more thing about the Red Tails. I would say they were a cut above fighter pilots that I saw escorting us with the 15th Air Force. They were a cut above. They jumped through a lot more hoops than white men did, and they were fabulous pilots, and the Germans were scared to death of them.
You want to comment on that?
Well, I can't personally comment. As I say, I had no contact with aerial contact. I did a lot of strafing, dive bombing, and other things that put me in close proximity, but nothing visual. Right.
I'd say very close, the nature of strafing.
Strafing was the most dangerous. People ask, well, why did you get out of there? Anyway, how many of you do not know what strafing is? Well, strafing is when you go in low and fire on the target.
Tell them how low. Tell them how low.
Well, sometimes some of the fellows came back with grass on their propeller blades. Things like that. So the lower you get, the harder you were to hit. If you were at 50 feet or 100 feet, they could aim at you easier than they could if you're at ground level, the car top level that you see here. You go in as low as you can, they couldn't get their guns on you as easily as they did if you were a little higher. So we tried to stay as low as we could.
And I assume your heart's pounding a little faster?
When I get a chance, I'll tell you about that mission. That first strafing mission.
We have a couple minutes, don't we, Don? I want to hear about it now.
Well, when we go as a neophyte fighter pilot, you were assigned more or less protected type positions to fly and escort missions, which were simpler than dive bombing or strafing. After about your 5th mission, you are combat ready, you seasoned fighter pilot. And we had strafing practice back in the States, but it had always been against stationary targets and no gunfire coming toward us. But all about my fifth mission, when I went into the briefing tent, the pilots that had been part of the 332nd longer than I had, I can't say older pilots, because I was older than quite a few of my upperclassmen. But the the long-term pilots began to give out expletives. And I, what's the matter? He said, it's a strafing mission. I said, how do you know? On our briefing chart, there was always a green line, a yarn line going from our base site to a rendezvous point, and then a red line would join, and the red and the green would go together around the initial points. The initial point being the aiming point. That's where we would leave, and we would rally left. The bombers always rallied left when they came off a bomb run. And we would rally left and pick up stragglers, or any bombers that had been hit by gunfire and not shot down. And we would escort them back to Allied airspace. Well, this green line only, it meant no bomber escort, it was a strafing mission. I went out to my plane and I put 2 sticks of chewing gum in my mouth. And incidentally, contrary to what you see in both the movies, Red Tails and the Tuskegee, we always had to have our oxygen mask fixed, not just dangling that you see in the movies, and that chatter that you see in the movies. That's a lot of hogwash. We had to maintain radio silence as much as we could. Anyway, my crew chief helped me into the cockpit, helped me buckle up. The mission took off. I won't go to a lot of detail, but our leader sighted a German train, and he called for us to get rid of our external tanks, jettison your tanks, and get into a maneuver called echelon that's strung out sideways. We slide down. The leader usually picked the engine, and then you pick out the individual boxcar you're going to fire on. Well, as I said, we'll explain strafing later. We had six. I had a D model P-51. The D model has 3 50 caliber machine guns in each wing. They're aimed 250 yards, synchronized 250 yards in front of your plane, which spreads the firepower on the far side within 250 yards. I began to fire, and that 6th bullet in each 5th bullet in each gun is an incendiary. It leaves a silver streak, and you can follow that. If you aim low and shoot before you get to the boxcar, you can see your bullets hit the dirt. You can see those silver streaks going, and you raise your nose just a little, and that raises the guns, and then you can see your bullets hitting the boxcar. Well, I'm flying along, and I'm aiming. I've gone full throttle. I don't know my airspeed, maybe 550 miles an hour, and I'm firing away. I see these silver streaks going out. Then I see silver streaks going past me. And the first thought I had was, geez, I must be flying faster than my bullets. Then reality struck in. The enemy was shooting at me. We had never had that in our practice gunnery back in the States. We had done simulated strafing missions, but never any live gunfire coming back toward us. There's a comment from many of my friends and others that hear me say that is, why don't you get out of there? Well, which way can you turn? Any way you turn, you expose more of your belly of the airplane than if you go straight for the source of that gunfire that's coming toward you. Well, the end of the story is that when I got back we completed the mission, did several strafing assignments. When we flew back, my crew chief, I don't know, helped me get out my gear, and I stepped out on the wing, and my knees turned to rubber. My adrenaline had pumped in and was going so fast. I had a mouthful of little BBs, that lump of chewing gum I started out with from those 2 sticks of gum I had put in my mouth. I had chewed all of the cohesion out of that wad of gum, and I literally had a mouthful of little BBs. But I didn't get really weak until I stepped out onto the wing of the plane and realized the danger I had just left. That's my favorite tale about.
Thank you, that's a good story. And I checked the record last night, 66 Tuskegee Airmen died in combat.
That's still the record as it stands. I get into arguments with some of the fellows that have been assigned to check the after-action reports of the bomb groups that we did escort for, and they tell me that there were more casualties than is mentioned in the record, and there were, well, the numbers aren't true. I say I'm going to use the numbers you found yesterday until they officially change our combat record.
That's the end of our symposium. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
If you want to talk to us, we'll be in the tent after we eat lunch.
They'd love to visit with you one-on-one. They can sign your program, get your picture taken with them. I don't think I need to tell you, these gentlemen would love to tell you some more stories. Thank you.
Sure.